to experience the strongest radio allowable by law. Secrets will be revealed. Myths dispelled. From the studio gym where excuses never apply, it's Superhuman Radio with your host, Carl Lenore.
I'm telling you, I am more monkey than human, because whenever I see my mug on the little monitor over here, I smile at it. I mean, I know I'm 14% Northern African, but I gotta believe I got a little chimpanzee in me too. This is a long-awaited show, and I'm just gonna bring my guest on real quick. Hold on a second. How you doing, Bill?
I'm well. How are you?
Good. So this is a long-awaited show, and I owe you an apology that dates back for a very, very long time ago.
For what?
And I'm going to tell you. But and I was so disappointed because I was all prepared to do this mea culpa, and we almost didn't connect this one. I was like, oh, great, this is great. But no, a very long time ago, in the beginning of my career, probably around 2006. I saw that a lot of negative podcasts were getting, or radio shows were getting a lot of attention. So I thought I would try to do something negative. And I actually interviewed Anthony Roberts, and you were talked about in the interview, and you weren't talked about in a favorable way. And I never did another interview like that again. And I don't know if you remember that, but I do. I'm kind of like one of those Alcoholics Anonymous guys. You got to go by, before you leave the planet, you got to apologize to everybody you did something bad to. So I just wanted to get that out of the way.
It's all good. Hey, you just had a guest on, and I remember Anthony, of course, but
yeah. Well, that's it. I just wanted to leave that there. So anyway,
we're good.
I saw a very interesting post of yours on Facebook the other day. I was like, I have to get this guy on, and people probably going to be a little confused why I felt it was so important to talk about this. But you now have. I just want to set the table. You now have a way that people can, in their own home, test the quality of their growth hormone. Is that correct?
Well, they can test whether or not there's somatropin in it, and it's an antibody-based test, so it's really accurate.
Okay, so and I want to set the stage here, okay, because I want to talk about the fact that right now, if people are buying legit growth hormone through their compounding pharmacist, the reality is that few, if any, compounding pharmacists have synthesizing or recombinant technology on the premises. So they're buying all their raw materials from someplace else. Would you agree with that statement?
Yeah, for sure. They're going through pharmaceutical producers and stuff.
Right. And even big pharma buys raw materials from China. I happen to know a girl that worked for Genentech who told me that they had partners. I got to look for the camera so I can get my parentheses in it, my quotation marks. Partners in China that they bought raw materials for to produce their growth hormone product. I mean, she confided this in me, and I believe her. She's a really decent human being. So the illusion that, well, I don't have to worry about this. These guys are talking about underground lab stuff and bodybuilding stuff, and I get my growth hormone from my pharmacist. The reality is that there's no proof that that's legit growth hormone either, just because of its origin. Isn't that a true statement? You may not want to go there, but I'm going to go there.
Well, you know what it is? There is a lot of legitimate pharmaceutical manufacture happening overseas. Me personally, I mean, there's protocols that are supposed to be followed. They're supposed to be purchasing from only a licensed supplier. It should be tested. There should be all the paperwork. Whatever we have in the supplement industry, it's magnified in the pharmaceutical field. So me personally, if I was having a script from a known compounding pharmacy, my physician was ordering it. It was going through a good compounding pharmacy. I wouldn't worry about it that much. It's not I'm not going to say it's a terrible idea to test if you have concerns. Black market, it's really bad in terms of quality and Yeah,
no doubt. But I remember. So I know legitimate longevity clinics that were buying blue tops when we were all on the boards buying blue tops back in the day, right? And they were putting labels on them. and they were having boxes made, and right, you remember that, right?
That I would be more. Yeah, I'm sorry, I know the products. Yeah, very well. And you know, interestingly, a lot of that, not all, but a lot of the Chinese product that was coming out, you know, we didn't test a ton of it, but when we saw tests on it or did testing on it, it was actually pretty good. One time the purity was higher in what was the gintropin? We tested a gintropin product, and they actually so pure, and we compared it to a pharmaceutical product. I'm not going to say the name, so I don't want to get in trouble. And the pharmaceutical product was also, you know, of acceptable quality, but the purity was a little lower on the pharma product than the, you know.
That's kind of interesting. But the reality is that I'm not trying to imply that, oh, it's all bunk, even if you're getting it from your pharmacist. But what I am trying to imply is that it's all coming from generally the same sources. The stuff that we're buying on the black market, sometimes it's coming from the same facilities overseas as the stuff that ends up reaching a pharmaceutical company. And so I kind of feel like, yeah, you know, if you're getting your growth hormone from a compounding pharmacist, you probably don't have to test it. But don't you want to know? Don't you want to know, like, don't you want to go, now that you could do it in your own home, don't you want to go, you know, because otherwise I'd want to go back to the pharmacist and say, I've been buying this stuff from you for 2 years. This is expensive stuff. Look how it tested. Like, has anyone mass spec this stuff to verify? Oh, no, we don't do that. We take their COA. Oh, we're back to the supplement industry now. You know what I mean?
Well, that's the thing, right? It's the supplier. If you have concerns, and there's a product that, you know, it would appear to be, you know, the type of item you'd find on the black market, as opposed to, you know, being handled and labeled by, you know, an actual known drug company. Yeah, that's certainly not a bad idea. And as you know, in the supplement industry, crazy stuff happens. You can't say that the drug industry is completely immune to that kind of thing, especially when you're talking to the gray area of ordering stuff from overseas. And
drug companies put stuff out that has to be recalled all the time, and it's recalled because something that wasn't supposed to be in there is in there, or something that was supposed to be in there isn't. And so these are the same, you know. So this kind, and a lot of times that stuff comes back down to the raw materials. You know, I think it's interesting that now we're seeing more and more companies literally synthesizing with amino acid sequencers, as opposed to recombinant technology and producing growth hormone, and even peptides as long as 296 amino acids now they're able to synthesize. So now that I mean, when you think about how recombinant, you know what, you explain how recombinant technology works, so that people have a better understanding of how they have been making growth hormone for a long time, since we stopped extracting it from cadavers.
It's a little outside my area of expertise, but they're actually taking a cell line and they're putting the sequence for the production of the very large complicated protein and stimulating the cell to produce it as a product, and then they capture it and purify it.
And so the way I explain it, because I'm not, you know, as intelligent as most of you guys, is they feed E. coli a bunch of raw isolated amino acids, and the E. coli eats it and poops back out growth hormone. But a lot of times it doesn't poop out growth hormone, it poops out aggregate. So they have to use special processes to wash the bad stuff out. And some of those things remain behind that they use to wash it out, which isn't good either. But now with this new synthesizing process using amino acid sequencers, they can actually produce like a kilo of growth hormone in an afternoon now. I mean, I have actually been to a facility. There's a facility in Kentucky called Tailor Made Compounding, and they I don't know that they synthesize growth hormone, but they synthesize every other peptide that you could imagine, and it comes out in nice clean jars, and they mass spec it and make sure that it reaches their requirements. But there's no more of this E. coli or using any type of things to wash impurities out. So that's kind of exciting.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the reality is that it's a real hit and miss type of a thing, making growth hormone if you're not using this new synthesization process, if you're still using recombinant, which justifies people testing their growth hormone no matter who they're getting it from, in my humble opinion. I mean, I'm an advocate for your product for the average guy or girl who's dropping $400 a month at their HRT clinic for growth hormone to at least say to themselves, it really is growth hormone. Test it once every 6 months. It really is growth hormone.
And you know what is happening a lot is that the suppliers, and again, it's not a widespread. It's happening with every product, but some of the suppliers, they will put the peptides like the GHRPs, those type of compounds, which are easier to produce, cheaper to produce. They'll put those in place of somatropin, and then knowing that often when people are testing it, their way of testing it is to go get a blood test for the serum growth hormone level. So they see that elevation and they're fooled into thinking that they've actually purchased that expensive product. And you're absolutely right. It's at a minimum hundreds of dollars a month. People invest thousands into cycles, and I personally think if you're going to put that kind of investment into something, spend $100 on a test just to see if it's actually what
it makes sense. So do you feel that this test, this in-home test, and I'm gonna let you explain how it works and all that sort of stuff. Do you think it's as reliable as mass spectrometry, which is the gold standard for assessing the quality of growth hormone?
Well, I would never say that that an at-home test will have the accuracy and the data that you would receive from a more complex test on the protein in a lab. However, this test, we do the reagents with the anabolic steroids, and those we've got that to a point where it's really accurate, especially with some of the more expensive anabolics. It's highly accurate, but it's based on some just some general chemical reactions, right? So it can be fooled potentially. We haven't found the compounds yet that can fool it for particular steroids, but in theory, there are other compounds out there that could produce similar color reactions. So, so you always say, it's not. You want to go to a lab test if you truly want to know what's in it, how much is in it, and you also can't do quantitative. However, with the growth hormone test, it's based on the growth hormone antibody. So that antibody has to bind the growth hormone to get the reaction that we're looking for in the test. So in that regard, it is very specific. It's possible soma-trem, which incidentally, the lab that we've been working with hasn't seen that in years. The 192 amino acids instead of 191.
I know.
That's very close. That might produce a similar reaction, but they haven't even seen that. So that's what I'm talking about. It's highly specific. It's really got to be that that long protein.
So is it more like you are pregnant, you're not pregnant, or does it say like this is a high level of what you're looking for based on like a color gradient or something like that?
No, I wish we could do the quantitative, but it's a really great comparison. The technology is very similar to how a pregnancy test works. And that's what we're looking at in terms of the result. Has that compound been detected? But in my experience with growth hormone, it's not. A product can be poorly handled and degraded and what have you. But in my experience, it's either growth hormone in there or they're putting something else in there too. That's a lot cheaper.
Like GHRP.
Exactly. Way cheaper.
Or even HCG. So I actually got involved in a situation many, many years ago, way back beyond the statute of limitations, where I had bought some peptides, let's say, and they were purported to be growth hormone. And they had the weirdest, like usually the little wafer at the bottom perfectly conforms to the bottom of the vial. It's it's like a cylinder, But these were like buttons. They were like they were like M&Ms, shaped like an M&M, like a football. If you looked at it from the side, I was like, "What is this?" They were rocking around in the bottom of the vial, and a buddy of mine said, "That looks like HCG from India." I said, "Really?" He goes, "Yeah, go out and buy a pregnancy test." He said, reconstituted and squirted on the pregnant. He says, son of a bee. It showed it was pregnant. It was like, you're pregnant. I was like, oh my God, this is HCG. The thing I didn't understand was HCG was actually more expensive at that point in time than basically what growth hormone was going for. So I was like, this doesn't make any sense. But, you know, those types of tests are very valuable. Being able to do that with growth hormone and go, yes, it's legit, or no, it's not. You know, because the reality is that for most people, the onset of observable changes in the body from growth hormone can take as much as 6 months.
Yeah.
And you've just invested a lot of money and then went, I don't think this stuff's working.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, it was easier when it was HCG because, you know, visually a lot of that product from India, I think, stood out a little bit. But, you know, visually it looks close enough. Most people won't tell the difference. But, you know, now there's the peptides and it's fooling a lot of people with their own blood work. So,
yeah, you don't want to be taking a peptide. You don't want to take one unwanted that's doing something that you just don't need done. And that's very true. And that sometimes these places, they'll call it whatever you want to buy that day. You know what I mean? So you got to be careful. So explain how does the process work? So if I have my growth hormone from a legitimate or a questionable source, I buy your test at Roid. Is it Roid Tests or roidtest.com?
Roid Tests.
Yeah, so that I got it right then. roidtest.com. There it is.
Yep.
And you go there and you buy the growth hormone test. How much is it?
It's $100.
Okay, that's not bad. You know, I mean, to tell whether or not you are spending $500 a month or whatever you're spending on growth hormone. And so then you, how do you do it? What do you do?
Basically, it's a dip test, very similar to a pregnancy test. So basically, you get your little dipstick.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And a little vial.
Right.
And you reconstitute your growth hormone. You put 1 milliliter of water in here and a tenth of a milliliter of your reconstituted growth hormone. Just a little bit.
But do you explain the concentration of the reconstituted growth hormone? Like, in other words, do they have to stay under 1 IU of growth hormone, or
no? The test is sensitive enough that it works with the range. It actually works outside of the range of what you can find in products on the market.
Yeah. So you don't have to fit. So then you don't go to yourself, wow, it's good, and I just wasted 10 IUs of it testing it. You know. Yeah,
exactly. So it's just a tenth of a milliliter, and then you dip it in. You hold it until the purple area gets wet, and then you just sit it down, and within 20 minutes you'll have a result. If you get one line will show that it's activated. If you get a second line, it's a fake product. If that second line does not appear, then it's a real product. So,
wow, that's cool. Very cool. So it's real simple, and there's no, because it's not colors and it's lines, you have less of a chance of not interpreting the results properly.
Yeah.
So that makes perfect sense.
We'd love to get all the tests to where quantitative is not possible. We'd love to get the tests, the steroids too, of course, where they're like semi-quantitative, but it's very complex. So it's something we're still working on.
So these are questions that everybody has about buying growth hormone. And I think that I actually remember you writing on one of the bulletin boards, and I don't remember if it was the old Avent Labs. Did you spend time on Mind and Muscle or Avent Labs?
I did. Yeah.
So people are arguing whether or not if there's a vacuum in the vial that meant anything. And if I recall, your writings indicated it may not. It may not.
Yeah, I gotta get back. It's been a while since I was thinking about that, but I don't think that is necessarily
indicative of anything. Yeah.
I mean, you can nitrogen blanket a product. It's just because the air has been removed doesn't necessarily mean it's the only way they do it. Like when you get a normal pharmaceutical product, my testosterone is not a vacuum in there when I open it up. It's
right
pressure.
Right.
So, yeah.
In your experience, if someone has the same source, they have continuity of the product, and they test it once and it tests good, do you recommend that they should test every 6 months in case they change the way they're making their products? Or do you think that if it's the same source you're getting from, same manufacturer, same everything, chances of it tested good today, it'll test good a year from now?
In my experience, generally that's the case. I wouldn't recommend, spending money on the test just for the sake of testing, but at the same time, it's growth hormone is a lot of money. So, in my opinion, if I were running and I was investing that kind of money on on the better part of a year, going to run that for a year or something, I personally probably tested a couple of times. I might test it a few times. Well, I have pretty ready access to the test, so I'm probably going to test it a lot.
Yeah. You just go walk into work and do it when you want to now, right?
Yeah. But, that aside, if it wasn't my product, I'd probably do it a couple times a year myself. Because, I want to be sure. Well, that's one of the things that really pisses me off is when people take your money for something that, they know they're not selling you.
Well, especially, so it's one thing to sell somebody pork when they ordered beef, but it's another thing to sell somebody something they're going to inject in their body that's going to have a desired reaction, and it's not what they think it is, and it has an undesired reaction or not any reaction at all. You're putting that in your body.
Sure.
There's a lot fewer gauntlets to keep this from doing harm than something you eat, which you could throw up or poop out.
Yes, absolutely. And I was just gonna add that you got to remember too, this is not just fitness people that are using these products. I'm sure we're all focused on fitness, but there's people that are medicating themselves or doing programs for their health, for disease. These products because it may be their easiest access, it may be their most affordable access to the products.
Yes,
I agree with that.
I agree. And now I want to segue into the other tests you offer there for just traditional anabolic steroids, because then when we take a break, I want to come back and talk about some of the information that you've gathered over the years about anabolic steroid use and the risk versus reward, especially. So people can also, if they're buying gear, not through their physician, chances are if you get it through your physician or your compounding pharmacist, testosterone is generally legit. The raw materials are tested and they're reliable and they're pretty easy to make. And so with that being the case, the more exotic ones, NPP, people want these different things. I've been told in the past, it's just test SIP or it's test ENT if it's coming from, like they tell you it's something more exotic, but it's really not. Has that been your experience?
It really depends on the compound. The testosterone, and even among the testosterones, for instance, enanthate, at least from what I've seen, and there are some studies on it too that look at the black market products, enanthate is the most likely to be real of the testosterones. Sustanon is more likely to be fake than most of the esters. But you have enanthate, very high likelihood it's real on the black market. Then you have the other extreme, you have like oxandrolone, where you have maybe 1 out of 3 products meeting what's on the label. Oxandrolone is horrible because it's a very expensive raw material. It's real easy to give people a small dose of something like D-bol or Winstrol, and they think that it's a similar effect to what they're expecting from oxandrolone, and they just make so much more money. Especially on the raw material. I've had, a lot of people say, hey, I don't think dealers are, it's a few extra dollars a bottle here or there, especially with testosterone. I really think a lot of this happens at the raw material level where these suppliers overseas, they know they're going to understand. They know they're not testing this stuff.
Yes.
And instead of a kilo for, they're getting $5,000, $6,000 for a kilo or something, they can kick a diluted, Winstrol kilo over that costs them in the hundreds of dollars,
right?
And it's a lot of profit. So,
and the blends tend to be not blends. A lot of the underground blends tend to be just test SIP or test ENT, nothing else. And I know girls who thought they were taking less androgenic drugs, and it was just testosterone, and they got masculinized very, very quickly.
Yeah.
So it's a problem, and I think a lot of the labs start out genuinely wanting to make their own gear, but then they find out how hard it is to actually get the real, more exotic powders, And they just go, oh, nobody's going to notice. They'll just, I mean, they're going to grow. It's 400 milligrams of some androgen a week increase. You're going to grow. So
that's the thing about anabolic steroids that makes this market so easy and such a lucrative target for people that want to do that. It's for that reason. It's hard to discern. I mean, I use steroids for well into the decade plus time, and I experimented with many things, and I'm quite certain that I could be tricked one compound to the next. It's just some of them, the characteristics are similar to other ones that are cheaper, and it makes it it's.
There's only one in my humble opinion that if it's real, and if it's not, you do as well, and that's Trenbolone.
I was going to say
Ananthate. Tren and Anthate, man. Your body changes, and most of the times you don't really like the way you feel. But it just, I've always said Tren kind of takes your body hostage and says, no, F you're going to do this. And you go, no, I don't think I can. No, you're going to do it.
I remember Tren well, but back when I was doing it, it was just the pellets. So I used to do
those in my kitchen. Yeah.
And I didn't even do the extraction. I just literally ground up the pellets really fine, and I mixed them with oil, and I took a nice big needle. I was just like,
Oh, you've got to be joking. You didn't have an abscess?
No problem. It's just it's a sterile product. It's meant for insertion into an animal, and it's just some binder and filler stuff to make the tablet hold. So I was really just giving that to myself, and it seemed to be. I never noticed anything from it. I noticed the Tren. I am not personally not the biggest fan of Tren. I don't feel great. Didn't feel great when I was using it. But it's strong, man. That's a strong compound.
I used to buy Phena pellets on the internet from a vet supply store. I used to get them home. I used to soak them in ether overnight. And the next morning I would pour that ether off through a couple coffee filters. And then I would put the ether back in a cupboard with a small piece of material like cloth over it, and I would let it evaporate. And it was very small. I mean, it wasn't like a bunch of it. It was, a little line of it was gone the next morning, and I was left behind with these beautiful yellow crystals. And that was what I started with to make my Tren, which I made at home, and a lot of people made it at home back in the day. And you knew it was real, and those Phena pellets were cheap until people realized that bodybuilders were buying them and not cow farmers, and they set up Phenaplex websites, and they was charging stupid money, and they ruined everything. But I know everybody did that back in the day.
Sure.
At least
your way was the better way. I'm certainly not recommending injecting it with all the binders and everything.
Yeah, I would imagine those binders would cause inflammation in this, site inflammation just from the injection.
Yeah, surprisingly, I was all right. I didn't notice much of a problem from it. And I'm really sensitive, too, because I can't go near anything really that's got propionate. I started to get a fever from it, and I think that it's the short ester. I'm just very sensitive to it. But the injection site itself, little soreness like, most short esters. But.
So let's do this. Let's take a break, and when we come back, let's talk about the different types of cycles that you've learned over the years and ways that and I want to know about your real opinion of the risk versus rewards if you're a professional athlete and that sort of stuff. Okay. Sure. So we're talking right now with Bill Llewellyn. Two websites we're going to tell you about. The first one is going to be roidtest.com, and then of course the website that's actually on my liner there, which is anabolic.org, where you can go and learn about any anabolic agent that you want to by just putting the name in there. And it's kind of like wiki for anabolics. It's very, very cool. Check it out. We'll be right back with more. Stay tuned.
This is the Superhuman Channel. Evolution just got kicked up a notch.
Welcome back. We're talking with Bill Llewellyn. He is an author of many, many books. He's written about anabolic steroid use extensively over his career, obviously from his obvious personal fascination with what they do. And I got a real beef with that I could go to a plastic surgeon and have life-threatening surgery done to have foreign objects inserted in my body. But as soon as I stick a needle in my hip, because I want to look more muscular, somehow I've gone off the crazy train rails.
That's it right there. I mean, it should be in the hands of doctors. If we can alter our bodies for cosmetic purposes, why can't we, allow a physician to carefully monitor your, transformation in this regard?
It doesn't make any sense. And I know the whole follow the money thing, and maybe that has something to do with it, but it just doesn't make any sense to me. But anyway, so, balancing risk versus reward. We have decades under our belt of this kind of N equals many experiment that's going on in the world today. I remember who was the scientist who did this study and performance and appearance enhancing drugs, PEADs. Remember the guy? He had like a German name about 8-10 years ago. He started referring to them more as an appearance enhancing drugs than performance, because he said they did like some internet survey where they anonymously polled purported anabolic steroid users to profile who they are for that study. And like 80% of the guys that were on steroids were on them because they wanted to look a different way. And so he was like, they're not performance enhancing drugs, they're appearance enhancing drugs, really, primarily. That's what people use them for.
Yeah.
And we don't have all these deaths. We don't have, not to steal some from John Romano, from Bigger, Faster, Stronger. But like if anabolic steroids really killed people, wouldn't we see deaths every single day? I mean, I know when I die at 89, they're going to say, oh, well, he used steroids. I would have lived to 91 if I didn't, you know what I mean? But,
well, you know what, that's the thing. It's like, we don't have controlled studies on the long-term abuse of anabolic steroids because it's unethical, and nobody's going to do that. So at the best we have studies where we look at a population, sometimes a fit population, and then a population of individuals that have used a long history of anabolic steroid. There's been a number of these types of investigations, and two things are consistent. One is there are things to criticize because these are not the type of controlled study that you would like to see when making a determination. So there's always something to look at and say, there's probably an issue with this. I don't like they use this population. Oh, they use people that were prisoners in this one, or what have you. On the other side, though, what is consistent is an increase in mortality among those that have long-term steroid abuse. So my personal view, digesting all of the research, all of my personal experiences and what have you, is that in the short term, these drugs are very safe. Like you said, people are not dropping. If they were that acutely dangerous and deadly, you would think we would see many high-profile athletes, falling. I
mean, more people know about death from flakka or bath salts than they do about deaths from anabolic steroids. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's a cult drug. Like, 10 million people a year aren't using that stuff, but they know about it. They estimated like 10 million guys a year on a cycle at any given time.
Yeah, there's a tremendous amount. I mean, the drugs are much more popular today than when they were when we criminalized them and tried to, sweep it under the rug, which obviously wasn't the case. But, the other side to that is, I do believe, and I think that the data, flawed as it may be, does point to the fact that if you make it a history of abusing the drug, I'm talking about HRT, that's a whole other thing. Testosterone optimization, in my mind, is one of the most important things for the male population to be taking a look at, and I think the health benefits are well established. But if you're going to abuse them for years into your years turn into decades of abuse, I do think that you're increasing your likelihood of dying of a cardiovascular issue at a younger age. And I think that's what we're seeing in the data. Again, as flawed as it is, I think that it's pretty strong there. So that's my thing. It's about minimizing the cardiovascular impact of anabolic steroid use if you're going to choose to do it.
Yeah, this is one. Khalid Hamloui is listening to the show from far, far away. and he said there's a study on APEDs by Dr. Matthias Dreyer. He was on my show, and we talked about that. And he said, they're appearance first and then performance-enhancing drugs, because the majority of people using them are looking to change the way they look.
That makes sense. This was all about athletes, right? Cheating in sports, but that's a small percentage of the actual users overall.
But I find it interesting that more athletes use ADHD drugs than anabolic steroids, yet we don't see the DEA and the authorities having jurisdiction going, we got to do something about Ritalin because baseball players are using it to run faster.
Yep.
There are certain things that are interwoven into us cellularly, and the whole Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde story is a story of generations, because we recognize that humans can do something horrible and become horrible monsters. And somehow, because Dr. Jekyll took a potion, right, and we're shooting ourselves in the ass with this oil, I kind of feel like the population overreacted about anabolic steroids because of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. I mean, that kind of oversimplifies it. But so, what are some of the obviously HRT? Obviously, if that's what you're doing and you're an older guy, but from an athletic standpoint, what are some of the effective stacks we're going to talk about strength and endurance, because obviously that's part of performance. What are some of the most effective stacks of anabolic steroids for strength?
Well, when I'm talking about effective stacks, I'm trying to, of course, mitigate the risk, right? We can go crazy and say, this is, this is 5 grams. This is the most effective.
Yeah. So until you start using 6 grams.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah. So what I'm talking about is finding that those drugs that offer the lowest risk profile, and then using them in the range where you're not running up into tremendously diminishing returns, where your dosage is really increasing and your gains are, they do go up generally the higher doses you do, but it's a tremendous diminishing return. So first thing, if you can, I recommend excluding all oral anabolic steroids and injectable versions of oral anabolic steroids.
Okay, wait a minute. Back up. So, and that's because both of these are methylated. They cause a lot of hepatic stress to the liver, right?
Yes, and cholesterol mismanagement, like what the effect on your lipids. If you take testosterone, even when you go up to, like, say, 600 milligrams a week, which is, to me, starting to push that point of diminishing return, and that's a strong dose, the effect that you see on your health markers, your lipids, especially, it's negative but modest. Then you could compare that with just a small dose of, say, Winstrol, stanozol. There's a study with just 6 milligrams a day, and the shift is much more dramatic in comparison. And I'm going to bring up another study, which I love to talk about. It involves injectable stanozol, 50 milligrams per milliliter version. And mind you, I say this, my personal experience, I used to really like that particular drug. It was very effective. Site growth I did like it. But they took this drug, they gave a single injection, one injection of 50 milligrams to a group of healthy young men. And they tested them a month later, 28 days later. One injection. And the lipids were, I think it was a 20% shift negative for good cholesterol and a 20% shift negative.
Yeah, but that had nothing to do with that drug. It was gone by then.
No, that's the thing. That is the thing. That's how profound the impact on lipid management can be with a drug like stanozol.
Okay.
That even though the drug had, it had such an impact on your management that it took the second measure they took after drug initiation was at 2 months, and by that point it had corrected itself. But 28 days later, you still had your. So
let me ask you a question. That injectable was in an oil, right?
I'm not actually sure. They do make it in both versions. I'm going to guess that it was probably water, which should have.
Oh, okay. So really, then there was no depot. I was gonna think, well, maybe the mechanics of the oil dissipating took a total of 3 weeks, but if it was aqueous, that's it. It hits the bloodstream.
And you know what else I think, and this is also an area I've spent some time trying to understand better, and it's not an area I consider myself an expert, but my understanding is that, oil is more of the vehicle to get the compound into the tissue. The oil itself may disperse and metabolize more quickly, but what you have then is the compound with very low water solubility that kind of sits in the tissues and takes a long time to get pulled up into circulation. So even if it was an oil-based stanozol, you would still expect that it wouldn't have a very long, life actively.
Yeah, none of one lone shot. No,
one shot, 50 milligrams.
Yeah.
So it's consistent when you see the studies with the methylated stuff, even with oxandrolone, they're really bad on the cardiovascular markers, and you can argue whether or not the HDL and LDL are the be all end all of cardiovascular health.
Yeah, but you know what? This is really not even an argument, because all of that research has been done on methylated corticosteroids, and we know that's why doctors put you on methylprednisone for 21 days only, and that's it, because they know that it's very, very tough on the liver. It skews lipids. It actually increases certain types of inflammation in the body. So we know that once you methylate when you make it hard for the liver to do its job, it doesn't give up. It works harder, and that changes the landscape completely.
And the other thing is that the liver is a big site of your management of your lipids, and the androgens, they can have a deleterious effect here. So bombarding it with that active drug, now you have an active steroid that, normally your body just metabolizes testosterone so easily. So there's very little androgen activity really taking place there. But now you're bombarding it with this methylated compound that it just can't metabolize. So now there's all this stimulation going on there as well. So if you can get the methylated stuff out and limit yourself to like testosterone, boldenone, nandrolone, maybe primobolan, if you can focus, and unless you're trying to win, some really serious bodybuilding competitions, if your focus is just image, if you just want to feel and look better, if you focus on those drugs, you could probably accomplish everything you need with just those 4 drugs. And the safety profile of them is going to be much higher than a lot of the other stuff.
So nandrolone is an interesting compound. And so I've experimented with nandrolone on and off for many, many years. And always gives me erectile issues. And it doesn't matter if I'm taking, so I've taken twice as much testosterone cypionate as nandrolone decoinate, DECA, and even using NPP, which is a fast-acting nandrolone, I noticed changes in erection and libido. Mm-hmm. And so I've come to the conclusion that I'm one of those high responders, and that has a lot to do with your success in sports. If you could use this stuff and it doesn't make you feel bad, you're like really good. That's like that's like a prerequisite if you're going to be a drug using sports participant. But I read a study not too long ago that implicated something called dihydronandrolone, mm-hmm. and it suppresses dopamine in the brain, and this is where the erectile / libido effects of this form arise from. Any theories on that?
Well, that's the thing with nandrolone, right? That's why its androgenic activity is so low. Is that in all these tissues that express high levels of 5-alpha reductase, your androgen responsive tissues, right? Testosterone is potentiated to DHT, which is 3 times stronger. Nandrolone gets reduced to DHN, which is significantly weaker. So I think that what you have, first off, if you don't have testosterone, you're not supplementing testosterone and you use nandrolone, I think a majority of people notice interference with libido and stuff like that, even sometimes sense of well-being and energy, because you have that reduced stimulation, probably in areas like the brain where it's also really important. DHT, estrogen, also estrogen levels, the conversion is much, much lower with nandrolone. So you have a situation where you have, anabolic stimulation in the muscles, which is really good. But but your DHT stimulation, in those tissues is low. Your estrogen.
Yeah, now you're talking about neurosteroids. When you start talking about estrogen influences norepinephrine, estrogen influences serotonin levels, and then you're sucking your dopamine levels down. It's like, yeah, but my knees don't hurt anymore, but I just hate life.
Yeah, and the aromatase inhibitors, same thing. I'm not a big fan of using those. I understand the aesthetics of how well they work sometimes, I get that, but man, trashing your estrogen is not a good thing. Us men, we have, that oversimplification decades ago, testosterone is the male hormone, estrogen is the female hormone, did such a disservice to us, because men need estrogen really bad for a lot of stuff, including building muscle, but really also for libido, sexual functioning, for a ton of stuff. And so I'm not a big fan of crashing that for the sake of,
So give that list again of the oils that you would consider worth the risk, assuming that you are taking low enough doses. And then I'm going to ask you for, what do you think a maximum dose a month or a week should be if you're looking to be safe, mitigate risk, but see some benefits?
Yeah, I mean, of course, there's always some risk when you're exceeding medical doses, but the compounds that I most favor, testosterone and enanthate, if you buy it from the black market, is going to be your most likely to be legitimate. Boldenone, also very high legitimate boldenone products on the black market. So that's another good aspect of that. Deca, Nandrolone, Decanate, and then maybe Primobolan as well to round it out. Those give you kind of a gamut of high anabolic, low androgenic, low estrogen, all the way up to testosterone, which is your primary androgen. And in terms of doses, I personally find that, and it varies by individual, of course, but that most effective range seems to be like 200 to 750 milligrams a week total yeah. of everything that you're taking in that regard. Beyond 750, again, you will get an enhanced effect, but it's not, if you do 1500, you don't get double the gains. So, but the side effects could be more significant.
One of the things that we've learned in peptides is that you feel peptides when you exceed the saturation dose. Saturation dose based on available receptor sites that can pick it up. So, like if you take GHRP6 and it makes you wildly hungry, you took way too much. So there's probably some truth to that with these types of anabolics as well, because of the fact that they are acting on receptors. So it may be that the magic of staying at those lower doses is that overall you're staying below what could be considered a saturation dose, combining all of those together.
Yeah. I mean, you're probably getting where that dose is, and I think saturation is a little misunderstood, because there's also there's the uncoupling of the receptor, right? And then how quickly
the affinity of the receptor, right?
Yeah, so there's a little bit beyond that, but yes, certainly you get to a point where you're really stimulating very well your androgen receptor content, and that's what it is. The excess is just going to spill over into other areas. You're going to increase estrogen more, and you're going to have other issues with side effects. So
Bill's Fitbit just told me how to get up and walk around, folks. That's what this is all about.
No, I'm looking for my charger. Actually, I was trying to connect on the other machine, so I'm at 5%. So I'm like,
okay. Well, we can end this pretty quickly here if we have to. That's not a problem. So the next thing is, what about endurance? Are there any types of anabolics or performance-enhancing drugs that you would recommend are safe at certain doses to people who are looking to increase their endurance?
Well, I think steroids aren't as popular in real competitive sports, of course, because we have other EPO-based drugs and stuff that are stronger. However, they do increase your red blood cell production, which can increase your endurance. I personally find that water retention is something that the athletes in the speed sports and endurance as well. When you're carrying your body around, for an event, you don't want to be pulling around excess water that isn't really adding to your performance. So It's typically more in my the compounds that I mentioned. It'd be more like maybe a primobolan. The athlete might focus on. Of course, people have, everybody's got their own preference, and a little bit of testosterone is also important for health as well. So, and
definitely not Tren, because Tren robs you of any endurance that you have available. It's just amazing how that's how you know it's working too. By the way,
it's a strong drug, but it's not a friendly one.
No. It looks like so. Can you stay through the next break, or does it look like you're going to lose your connection here?
You know what is it? I hate to do it, but I'm in the middle of a move, and I'm not sure where my cord is, so I don't want to say yes.
Okay. So let's just do this. Let's go ahead and plug your websites again. So the roidtest.com is where people can go if they want to try the growth hormone test at home, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then Anabolic, is it Anabolics plural?
Just anabolic.org.
Anabolics.org is the place to go.
Anabolic.
No, anabolic.org is the place to go if you want to learn more about anabolics in general. That's the place. All right, look, Bill, thanks for being here. I'm going to go ahead and we'll do this again.